There's a nugget buried in a new NBC News poll that I think is worth pulling and expanding on. And the nugget is this: just 32% of voters have a favorable opinion of Vice President Kamala Harris, while 49% have an unfavorable view of her. That net -17 rating is the lowest ever measured by NBC for a sitting vice president. Mike Pence, by way of comparison, had a -4 favorable-unfavorable score in an October 2019 NBC poll. Which, of course, begs the question, why? Why are her numbers so low? Now, the obvious answer, and the one that Democrats give by rote at this point, is that Harris's unpopularity is directly and solely linked to the fact that she is A, the first woman to be vice president, and B, the first black person to be vice president. I do think sexism and racism are part of the problem, no question about it, former White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain told Kara Swisher in late April about Harris. Then there was this: her firstness also can't be ignored in how the public metabolizes her. That's a tweet from NBC's Ali Vitale. And I think that's a right answer. While there's no polling data to suggest Harris's race and her gender is at the heart of why so many people dislike her, not many people admit they're racist or sexist to a stranger, it's hard to imagine that, given what we know about lingering prejudice in the country, the first black woman elected president wouldn't face some considerable headwinds because of that fact. So that, to me, is not really up for debate. There's some percentage of the American electorate who doesn't like Harris because she's black, because she's a woman, or because she's both. But I also think there's more to this story as well. Consider this: Harris is the vice president to a man who is 80 years old and will be 82 years old when and if he is sworn into a second term in January 2025. That, by default, makes Harris and her role as VP significantly more important and high profile than the average second in command. In fact, several Republican contenders have already floated the possibility of Harris winding up as president in the next few years. Every liberal knows it, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley has said. They know that it's Kamala Harris that's going to end up being president of the United States if Joe Biden wins the election. And there's this from Chris Christie: Joe Biden, in my opinion, is an awful president, he said over the weekend, adding this: and we can't afford to have him from age 82 to 86 in the White House, or even worse, have Kamala Harris assume the presidency. Now, the spotlight on Harris, therefore, has been much brighter than on her predecessors in office because there are serious doubts about Biden's health and well-being among the general public. And I'll note here, some of this is cynical political pandering. The likes of Haley and Christie know that Harris is very unpopular within their base. So by attacking her and suggesting she might be president one day, they're throwing red meat to a crowd that loves red meat. And they're doing so to try to bolster their own conservative chops. It's less about Harris, really, than it is about pleasing the Republican base. Then there's a part of the Harris story that is, I think, harder to tell and therefore less often told. She has struggled mightily in her early days in the office. This from the New York Times in February tells that story, and I'm quoting here. The painful reality for Mrs. Harris is that in private conversations over the last few months, dozens of Democrats in the White House, on Capitol Hill, and around the nation, including some who helped put her on the party's 2020 ticket, said she had not risen to the challenge of proving herself as a future leader of the party, much less the country. Even some Democrats, whom her own advisors referred reporters to for supportive quotes, confided privately that they had lost hope in her, which, wow. Now, it is worth noting here that vice presidents have struggled since, well, forever, to delineate themselves from the president and shape their own political brand in a positive way. You wind up getting lumped into the administration almost no matter what you do. And that's not a great thing for Harris's poll numbers. Joe Biden's approval rating is hovering in the low 40s, which is not great. So Harris isn't getting any sort of boost from Biden, but her numbers are even below his. So it's not simply the drag from the president that explains her numbers. And I do think that some of that explanation and blame has to go to Harris herself. She long struggled to find an issue to define her, although abortion rights now appears to be it. Her early media appearances, most notably a June 2021 interview with NBC's Lester Holt, were not good at all. And she has cycled through staff, and she particularly did so in her first 2 years in office. Now, the key question here, of course, is how to allot Harris's blame pie. Is 75% or more of it due to her being a black woman? Do the inherent pressures and frustrations with being vice president account for the majority of her struggles? Or it mostly her own screw-ups and errors in office that she has to blame? So here's at least how I would break down that blame pie. I put 50% of it in race and gender. I put 20% of it in problems of just being the vice president, and I put 30% in Harris's own unforced errors, which is to say that gender and racial bias still account for the majority of opposition to Harris. And the second banana nature of the vice presidency absolutely matters too. But it is also to say that Harris bears some decent-sized chunk of blame for her own poor numbers. She struggled to step into the role of national leader and to find ways to stand out amid the admittedly challenging nature of the VP gig. So what? Regardless of the reasons, Harris needs to find a way to turn around her numbers between now and 2028 when, presumably, she will be running for president, no matter what happens next November.